Did you ever stop and wonder if you could be related to everyone with your last name?
Just think if you're a Lincoln, how you'd be congratulated if Honest Abe were someone you could claim.
To clear up any mystery, just check your family history.
Genealogy's the name of the game. Now some ancestors you'll find you want to hide,
but most of them will fill your heart with pride.
Oh, your family tree, your family tree. Check your genealogy, find who was who and how who came to be. On your family, 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 family tree.
Welcome to the Genealogy Radio Show, the radio show that's keeping you in the loop. And this week's show is all about the Donegal workhouse records, which have just been released and are available on Find My Past, but also available in Donegal at local libraries and so on, where they have computers with SAME on. So it's very useful to know that. But I want to talk a little bit about workhouses, and we have done shows before on it. We had a show with Alva Maddock on it today, on this season, and we also had a lot of coverage of Portumna Workhouse, which is an example of a workhouse in action and open for visitors and runs courses, does a range of different events, so on. But today we're concentrating on the records that you'd find in a workhouse, where you have the Board of Guardians and so on. And the reason why this release is so important is because it shows you exactly what type of information was collated in a workhouse and what you could expect to find and how you might find some of your ancestors. Some people think, oh, well, none of mine would be in a workhouse. That's not necessarily true. Ireland was a very poor country, and you could have a lot of people gaining outdoor relief and all sorts of things that had come into being as part of the workhouse. So remember, the records for the workhouse for family history in Ireland change from the start of workhouse and the poor law unions and their wind up and finish in 1923. They didn't just dismantle the whole system, they still had a very similar administrative system for many decades after 1923 as well. So this is why it's really important and why these records are really, really good as well. Now, some of the workhouses, Ballyshannon Union Workhouse, served parts of Leitrim and Sligo. And when that was no longer a workhouse, it was used as a district hospital for a number of years, and more recently an old people's home. Another part of the building is in use by Donegal County Council, and Donegal Archives have been responsible for the release of these records as well on the Donegal Workhouse. So a district hospital was built on the site of Donegal Workhouse, while some of the buildings which remain from Dunfanaghy Workhouse have subsequently been transformed into the successful Famine Museum. No part of Glenties Workhouse remains. Originally the workhouse became a district hospital, later a school was built on the site, and it's still in operation there. So you can see the fabric of buildings creates the foundation of others. In Inishowen, the Carndonagh Workhouse is also operating the ownership of the Northwestern Health Board. The Inishowen Workhouse too became a district hospital, but was demolished in 1958. Part of Letterkenny Workhouse, once the Fever Hospital, became the County Museum. Milford Workhouse was demolished in the 1960s and only the ruins remain. Stranorlar Workhouse was to become the county home, St. Joseph's, but the original building has been destroyed and St. Joseph's Nursing Home now stands in its place. So you can see the final workhouse and aspects are really important as to what happens with those. But I had a look at the records on Find My Past, and that is fee-based as such and subscription-based, but it is well worth having a look at seeing what's going on So you can look through the Donegal workhouses, registers and minute books, and you can search for your Irish ancestry through more than 400,000 records from the Donegal workhouses. And there are 427,000 records, almost 500,000 records. The records include admission and discharge registers as well as Board of Guardians minute books. The books span from 1840 to 1922 and comprise records of 8 poor law unions across Donegal. These records have been digitised by Find My Past in partnership with Donegal County Council. So very useful indeed. What can the records tell me? Well, I'm looking at the page, and with every result you find an image of the original record and transcript. The transcript was typed versions of the vital details you find in the original documents. The details in the transcripts may vary, but most will include name, sex, occupation, marital status, age, birth year, event date. These could be minute books, admission books or discharge books, admission year, discharge year, death date, previous residence, union, county and country, document type, format, and archive and archival reference. So the Donegal Workhouse Register and Minute Books span from 1840 to 1922. They comprise records from 8 poor law unions. The unions were Ballyshannon, Donegal, Dunfanaghy, Glenties, Inishowen, Letterkenny, Milford, Stranorlar. The records have been digitised, and until late 1830 all support for the poor and incapacitated in Ireland had been funded by charity. So the Poor Law Union is a departure from that. The care and management of paupers had been covered by law in England actually. So since the 1601. Elizabethan times. So we differ from that. We weren't covered by the national poor law until 1838. And people kind of think, well, this was to look after the poor and so on. It wasn't necessarily that good because it didn't work during the famine. It was overcrowded in bits and pieces. And it certainly led to a lot of institutional behaviour that was less than desirable. Anyone visiting the Portumna workhouse would see how workhouses could be open to abuse at that time. And for example, you had no right to, just because you went in as another family member didn't mean you stayed with the family members. You never saw them even though you were in the workhouse because segregation was the norm. Any children over 2 would be separated from their parents. So the workhouse is indicative of a very good way of maybe measurement of what's going on, if you like, but it comes with the cost of the context of the sad things that happened in workhouses and the brutality and distress that could be caused in there as well. So all these kind of things are important to note. Now, on looking through the type of series that we would have had, you see special diet books, you see illness records, so on, and you see occupations as well, and occupations of widows, and children were known by the occupation of their father as well. So, for example, child of a tinsmith, child of a sweep, child of a labourer, widow of a small farmer. Occupation is very important because this may be how you differentiate your ancestors. If you know that nobody in your family was ever a tinsmith, well, it's hardly likely that they suddenly become a tinsmith with the records, and you know perhaps that isn't your James Gallagher or whoever that is. You know that they were small farmers. So when you see James Gallagher, small farmer in the area that you're looking at, it helps you identify what's going on there. And that's important because it can be a way that you don't just take the first name that comes to hand and so on. And that's how you match what you're doing. Now, the dismantling of the workhouses is really important because the Dáil set in motion the dismantling of the Board of Guardians, and the boards gave their full backing, and that was done from the 1920s and completed in 1923. So the county council system started to come into that time, and the Milford Board of Guardians, a letter was read from the local government department of Dáil Éireann where they approved the above resolution by the various Donegal Boards of Guardians as a step forward and towards their goal of the complete abolition of the workhouse. They were hated. They were absolutely hated, and it was one of the first things that the new state in Ireland did. So with the removal of the Board of Guardians came the abolition of the workhouse and the poor law union system, or poor law system of relief in Ireland. And one of the Board of Guardians of Milford was officially abolished in 1923, along with other boards of guardians. So by 1923, you're looking at a new system in place, but really it's very good for the type of records you're looking at, because if you have somebody in 1920 aged 80, you know that they were born in 1820, 1830, and it's giving you a good lead onto ancestry. So you have the name, you have to go by the terms of what they're looking at. So you have the name of the inmate, the residence, the previous to admission, the status, the employment or calling. So like we tend to, when we transcribe records, we tend to do away with the way they called it. And that could be a big problem when as I'm going to be talking about in a few minutes, because you could be making assumptions that aren't really there to make. So employment or calling is the name of the language used in Donegal, perhaps for employment. Disabled, the name of the wife, and also there's a bracket for a name of a wife or husband not in the workhouse. So condition, they actually describe the condition of the inmate on entry to the workhouse, and one of the things that you could make a mistake on is they have a term fairly clad. Now, you could read that as fairly glad, if you didn't know that fairly clad meant to be fairly dressed, how you're clad. And so a term clad, how are you clad, is not how are you dressed would be used more today, and so on. So these are all the type of things that you really need to take note of when you're looking. Now, the workhouses themselves showed a high level of poverty in 19th century Ireland, and it meant that hundreds of thousands of Irish people passed through the workhouse. Irish workhouses were built to house around 800 inmates, but they never just housed 800 inmates. They always housed an awful lot more than that. And the inmates were separated into groups of men, women, children, able-bodied and infirm. They were expected to wear a uniform inside and were kept separate from other groups. They were expected to work for a roof over their head, and the work was difficult. Common tasks included breaking apart old ropes and fibre. Laundries were a big part of it as well. Women might be employed with sewing tasks, and certainly used the treadmills as well. Food was monotonous and basic. It wasn't meant to encourage you to go into the workhouse. Encouragement to go into the workhouse was kept at an all-time low. They didn't need numbers. They had in excess of 800. So they weren't perhaps getting a huge amount of support to take more than 800. It meant more work for them. The saddest thing is to see the distinct variation between rooms in the workhouse, between how they would have carpeted areas in the side stairs for the master guardian and the teachers and so on, and how this quickly relinquished into different materials to belie the status of those unfortunate enough to end up in the workhouse. So there's dramatic status markers within a workhouse. It's not the same type of finishes in each room. You get different, more comfortable rooms for those who are working there than what those who are living there for relief and so on. And the bedding and the way of, they were very aware of disease. They knew this. So the type of diseases are noticed in the thing. And of course, fever hospitals would have been for used for those for contagious diseases, because even if you were working there, you didn't want to be at risk of getting a contagious disease. It wasn't that you were that bothered about the inmates. People are very self-serving at times, even in environments like this in the 19th century, and they're well aware that disease can spread and so on, and how it spreads, and they have a morbid fear of that. What's interesting is, and what would be interesting to do with the study of the Donegal workhouses, because it's such a large volume of information altogether, is the ability to sample that information and derive wonderful statistical records from this of mortality and entry and so on, illness, is at your fingertips. And that would be the making of a very good study, which is much needed in Donegal, where perhaps the records don't exist in some cases prior to the 1860s. So it's providing, again, a network of what's going on in Donegal, and the names in the certain areas that belong to the certain areas, the first names and the surnames and how they link up and so on, and the names of the areas, and also the occupations of those who are more likely to end up in the workhouse. It isn't always labourer. It can be widow of small farmer and so on. And surprisingly enough, how much they're getting, what type of relief they're getting, the age they're getting, and if they've got a large amount of family, they're definitely in need of the indoor relief system, and a lot of people are getting that and so on. So the way to search is quite simple. You can go into Find My Past and go into the A to Z of record sets and so on. And you have the Donegal cemetery records as well in this. So Donegal County Council is really done a great job with the digitisation of this. Your 433,398 workhouse and poor law records are there, and your institutes and organisations of how the books, that the registers and minute books. So very, very useful to browse the parish and have a look and see what's going on and how that works as well. So searching is always one that you decide to see what you need to see. You can see the Ballyshannon books range from 1840 to 1844. There's an image count of 235 there. You can see it goes right up to the it's a wonderful account, and you have your Glenties that are going there as well. So that's one way to search as well, through the books themselves, and not through, because you'll get a sense when searching through the books of what's happening within each locale, and each locale will have different stresses and strains. So a welcome relief, and well done Donegal County Council and Find My Past for this, because this is filling a much needed gap in family history archive records, and is now available and has been released online. Now, just a few announcements to make. There's a few things coming up that you might be interested in. I know that My Heritage are running an event in Amsterdam in early September, and that's very interesting for those who like My Heritage and wish to use that and so on. And there's also Roots Tech coming up in London, and Back to Our Past in Dublin in October. I'll be there in Back to Our Past, and I'd welcome any of your queries at irishroots@clansandsurnames.com. I also have a new website, Trace Your Irish Roots, so please do log on to that, because I'll be developing that shortly. It's new enough at the moment and I haven't had a lot of time to work on it, but I'll be adding a lot of the information on recommendations. I've got unlimited pages on this because I needed to do that. The information I had was expanding, and I wished to support the radio show with the information and so on. There'll also be a school in May 2020, ancestral connections, routes to the future and so on. So I'm working on developing that because I believe the way to go is technological advances, marrying it with traditional means of context in the past. The show is podcast, so we have 5 years of shows available now for you to listen to, and we'll be delighted for you to support Radio Correspondence, which was a community radio initiative, and I've been involved in this for 5 years now. It's hard to believe it's time flown. We're going to have a special hour-long show and be talking to some nice guests on that. So thank you for listening.
Did you ever stop and wonder if you could be related to everyone with your last name?
Just think if you're a Lincoln, how you'd be congratulated if Honest Abe were someone you could claim.
To clear up any mystery, just check your family history.
Genealogy's the name of the game. Now some ancestors you'll find you want to hide,
but most of them will fill your heart with pride.
Oh, your family tree, your family tree. Check your genealogy, find who was who and how who came to be. On your family, 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 family tree.